She arrived with her daughter at the Billionaire CEO's office for an interview. What he did left her speechless.
The early morning in Chicago had that kind of cold that bites your skin and warns you winter doesn't forgive anyone. Maren Briggs sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the lamp casting shadows across the paper scattered in front of her. Numbers. Always numbers. Medical bills that seemed to multiply like a silent plague, payment reminders arriving with the cruel punctuality of something that knows you're hanging by a thread. She typed on the calculator with frozen fingers, doing that impossible math where 2 plus 2 never equaled 4. Something was always missing. On the living room couch, Leah slept curled up in her pink blanket, crayons scattered around her like confetti from a party that never happened. The girl had drawn another complete family before falling asleep. Father, mother, daughter, dog. Always the dog they never had. Maren knew this was no life for a 6-year-old, sleeping on the couch while her mother battled spreadsheets that never balanced. But what else could she do? The one-bedroom apartment was all they could afford, and even that was late. 2 years. It had been 2 years since she buried her ex-husband, since his debts became her debts, since she discovered that level loan doesn't pay hospital bills. And now here she was, the resilient widow, the strong mother, the competent professional, all those pretty labels people used when they didn't know what to say to someone who was clearly drowning. She reached for the coffee cup beside her, cold for hours now, and took a bitter sip. It matched perfectly with how life tasted lately. The truth was, Maren was good at what she did. Really good, actually. Her clients always praised her precision, her ability to find errors where no one else could see them, to transform financial chaos into crystalline order. Too bad she couldn't do the same with her own life. She looked at the stack of resumes she'd sent out the previous week, all unanswered. Freelance work is like that. Inconsistent, unpredictable, cruel to anyone who needed certainties. And Maren desperately needed certainties. She needed to know there would be food on the table next month, that she could pay for Leah's school, that she wouldn't have to choose between medicine and rent. It was this kind of math that kept her awake until dawn, reorganizing pens by color when the anxiety got too tight.
Caroline always said she needed to take more risks, step out of her comfort zone, stop calculating every step as if life were one giant spreadsheet. Easy to say when you didn't have a child depending on your every decision. Easy to say when mistakes didn't mean eviction or hunger. Maren had learned the hard way that the world had no safety net for those who fell. You simply splattered on the ground and had to pick yourself back up alone, broken bones and all. So yes, she was cautious. Yes, she checked everything 3 times. Yes, she avoided surprises like someone avoiding a contagious disease. Because surprises, in her experience, were never good. Surprises were terminal diagnoses, bills that tripled overnight, funerals you organized while trying not to fall apart in front of your daughter. But that early morning, staring at the bank balance, screaming its insufficiency in bright red, Maren knew she needed to do something different. The definition of insanity was repeating the same actions, expecting different results, wasn't it? And she was definitely repeating the same cycle. Work herself to exhaustion, earn little, pay even less, start over. Her fingers stopped over the keyboard. Maybe Caroline was right. Maybe it was time to accept those jobs she always turned down. The ones that paid too well, the ones that seemed too good to be true, the ones that made her instincts scream, "Careful!" Because the alternative was to continue in that downward spiral until there was nowhere left to fall.
She opened her laptop with a determination born of desperation and began reviewing the emails she'd marked as maybe later. One caught her attention. It had arrived 3 days ago, and she'd ignored it for seeming too absurd. The proposal was simple on the surface. Organize the personal finances of a private client, 6-week job, payment generous enough to cover 3 months of expenses. The problem? The client was described as eccentric, demanding, and averse to change. The kind of person Maren normally avoided because she already had plenty of difficult life. But the amount was real. It was concrete. It was the difference between surviving and finally breathing. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, the cursor blinking on the reply button. Leah stirred on the couch, murmuring something about penguins in her sleep. Maren looked at her daughter, at that innocent face that deserved so much better than a mother constantly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And then, before she could overthink it and back away like she always did, she typed a short professional response confirming her interest. She hit send and closed the laptop with a sigh that was half relief, half terror. The notification ping came almost immediately, as if someone had been waiting on the other side. The response was brief, almost cold. Present yourself Monday, 9 a.m., address attached. No name, no introduction, no clue what awaited her. Just an address in the financial district and the growing feeling that she'd just done something that would change everything.
Monday arrived with that cruel irony only life knows how to orchestrate. Maren was ready, impeccable gray suit, leather briefcase that had been a wedding gift and still looked new because she rarely had anywhere to use it, hair pulled back in a bun that screamed competent professional. She had planned everything. Drop Leah off at school at 8, take the subway, arrive 15 minutes early. Simple math, perfect schedule. Until the phone rang at 7:30 in the morning with the principal explaining, in an apologetic tone, that a pipe had burst and the school would be closed at least until Tuesday. Maren looked at Leah, who was chewing cereal with milk while swinging her little legs in the chair, completely oblivious to the panic beginning to take hold of her mother. Caroline was away on business. The emergency babysitter wasn't answering. And call the client on the first day saying she couldn't make it? That was signing her own professional death sentence. So there she was, 40 minutes later, walking through the revolving doors of a glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, with Leah glued to her hand. The girl carried her pink unicorn backpack and looked at everything around her with those enormous eyes that absorbed the world as if it were a giant storybook. The lobby was everything Maren wasn't. Imposing, gleaming, intimidating. Marble on the floor, chandeliers that probably cost more than her entire apartment, and a blonde receptionist with the expression of someone who dealt with urban pests for a living. The woman looked from Maren to Leah, and back to Maren, and something in her face changed, that kind of silent judgment that needs no words. "May I help you?" The voice was as cold as the marble beneath her feet.
Maren lifted her chin in that gesture she'd perfected over 2 years of widowhood, pride disguised as confidence. "I have a 9 o'clock meeting with..." She checked the email on her phone, realizing for the first time that there was no name at all, just executive penthouse, top floor. The receptionist arched a perfectly drawn eyebrow. With Mr. Townsend? There was pure disbelief in that question. And the child? Maren felt Leah squeeze her hand tighter. "It's an emergency. The school closed unexpectedly and I had no one to leave her with. It'll just be today, I promise." The woman sighed as if Maren had asked to camp out in the lobby. "Mr. Townsend doesn't receive visitors with children. In fact, he barely receives visitors at all. I'll need to check if..." But Maren was already too tired, too stressed, too desperate for this. "Look, I understand this isn't ideal protocol. Believe me, if I had any other option, I wouldn't be here embarrassing myself and my daughter." Her voice came out firmer than expected, that tone she used when she needed to be both mother and warrior. "But I have a scheduled meeting, I arrived on time, and my daughter will sit quietly with a coloring book while I work. If that's an insurmountable problem for Mr. Townsend, then he can dismiss me personally." The receptionist opened her mouth, clearly ready with a sharp response, when a male voice cut through the air like a blade. "That won't be necessary." Maren turned her head so fast she nearly twisted her neck. Coming from the elevators was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a business magazine. Dark suit that fell perfectly over broad shoulders, brown hair with gray strands at the temples, eyes that seemed to calculate everything in fractions of a second. He was tall, maybe early 40s, with that kind of presence that made the entire room bend in his direction. Reid Townsend. Had to be him. No one else would walk through that lobby as if he owned the entire building, which Maren realized with a knot in her stomach, he probably did. He stopped a few steps from her, and for the first time since entering there, Maren felt something beyond anxiety. Curiosity, because he wasn't looking at her with irritation or judgment. He was looking at Leah. "Unicorns?" he asked, pointing to the backpack. Leah nodded, still shy. "The ones with glitter?" The girl finally smiled. "And rainbow wings?" He nodded, serious as if they were discussing $1 million contract. "Excellent choice. Rainbow wings are crucial."
Then finally he looked at Maren, and she wasn't quite sure what she saw in those eyes. Weariness, perhaps? Recognition of something familiar? You must be Mrs. Briggs.
Maren nodded, trying to recover some remnant of professional composure. Yes, sir. I apologize for the situation. My daughter's school closed unexpectedly and I couldn't find anyone to... He raised his hand, interrupting her rehearsed apology speech. Emergencies happen. I have a secondary office I don't use. There's a desk, comfortable chairs, internet. Your daughter can stay there. He looked at Leah again. Do you draw? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Then you'll need proper materials. He turned to the receptionist, whose expression now bordered on shock. Jennifer, have someone bring paper, colored pencils, markers, the complete kit, and something for her to eat. Children get hungry. Jennifer blinked as if she'd just witnessed a miracle. Yes, Mr. Townsend. He turned back to Maren, and there was something in his gaze she couldn't decipher, a softness hidden beneath layers of corporate seriousness. Shall we? As they headed to the elevator, Leah between them swinging her backpack, Maren couldn't process what had just happened. She'd come prepared to fight, to justify herself, to prove her worth despite the chaos. Instead, she found understanding from a billionaire known for being eccentric and averse to change. The elevator rose in silence, just the soft sound of ambient music and their breathing. Reid watched the ascending numbers on the display, but Maren noticed, because she was trained to notice details, that he was observing their reflection in the polished metal of the doors, watching how she held Leah's hand, how she fixed the girl's hair with absent tenderness, how she took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was to come. And when the doors opened to the top floor, to that world of glass and sky that seemed to be above all earthly problems, Maren Briggs didn't know she was about to enter far more than a simple temporary job. She was about to enter the life of a man who had built an entire empire, but never learned to build a home.
3 weeks had passed since that chaotic first day, and Maren still couldn't fully understand the man who hired her. Reid Townsend was a walking contradiction. He commanded meetings with unwavering authority, but stopped everything when Leah appeared to show him a drawing. His eyes dissected financial reports with surgical precision, but he stumbled over his own words when trying to ask a personal question. And then there were the nights. Those damn nights when everyone had already left and the office was plunged into that silence only empty skyscrapers know. He always showed up, like a corporate ghost, holding 2 cups of coffee and pretending he needed to review something urgent. Maren knew it was a lie. Men like Reid Townsend didn't review anything at 9 at night. They paid people for that. But she accepted the coffee, accepted the company, and pretended this was just professionalism. Until the night everything changed. It was Friday, and Maren had promised Leah they'd leave early. Pizza and movies, the kind of normal outing normal mothers did with normal daughters. But a discrepancy in Reid's tax records had consumed extra hours, and by the time she finally solved the problem, it was past 8. The office was empty, silent, except for the distant hum of the ventilation system. She saved the file, rubbed her tired eyes, and that's when she heard footsteps. Reid appeared in the doorway with those 2 cups, but this time there was something different in his face. Weariness, perhaps. Or maybe it was something deeper. That kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. Still here, he asked, but his voice came out softer than usual. Maren accepted the coffee with a tired smile. Finishing saving you from a tax nightmare. You're welcome. He sat in the chair across from her desk, not on the other side where bosses usually stayed, but beside her, as if they were accomplices in some conspiracy. You're too good at this. It wasn't an empty corporate compliment. It was a genuine observation. Maren shrugged. It's just math. Numbers don't lie. People lie. Feelings lie. Promises lie. But numbers always tell the truth, even when the truth hurts. She took a sip of coffee, hot and strong the way she'd learned to like it. Your personal finances are a mess, you know. For a man who built a real estate empire, you spend money like you're trying to prove something. Reid was quiet for a moment too long, looking at his own cup as if the answers were floating in the coffee. What if I am?
The question caught Maren off guard. She looked at him. Really looked. Perhaps for the first time since she'd started working there.
And she saw beyond the impeccable suit, beyond the corporate authority, beyond the fortune that made people like Jennifer in the lobby treat him as if he were made of gold. She saw an exhausted man, a lonely man, a man who maybe had built skyscrapers because it was easier than building connections. Prove what? She asked softly. Reid let out a humorless laugh. That's the funny part. I don't know anymore. He rested his elbows on his knees, posture completely opposite to the rigidity he maintained in meetings. My father abandoned me when I was 12, just went out to buy cigarettes and never came back. Bad movie cliche, right? My mother worked 3 jobs to raise me, died before I made my first million, and I swore I'd prove he was wrong, that I was worth something. Maren felt something tighten in her chest, that inconvenient empathy that arises when you recognize your own pain reflected in someone else. And you proved it. He shook his head. I proved I know how to make money, that I know how to build, buy, sell, that I know how to turn empty lots into full skyscrapers. But when I go home every night, to that huge apartment overlooking the lake, he paused, as if the next words cost something precious. There's no one there. There's never anyone. And I keep wondering what kind of victory this is, having everything and having nothing at the same time. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with truths rarely spoken in corporate environments. Maren knew she should say something comforting, something professional, something that would maintain that invisible line between employee and employer. Instead, she heard her own voice saying, "Your father wasn't wrong about you. He was wrong about himself." Reid looked up, surprised. Maren continued, because now that she'd started, she couldn't stop. Men who abandon children don't do it because the children are worthless. They do it because they themselves feel worthless, and it's easier to run than to face their own reflection every day. You built all this. She gestured vaguely at the office, at the building, at the invisible empire that stretched across the city. Not to prove anything to him, you built it to prove something to that 12-year-old boy who stood waiting at the door, thinking he'd done something wrong. But you didn't do anything wrong, Reid. You never did. She saw when her words hit him, that moment where something inside him disarmed, where years of emotional armor developed a crack. How do you know that? His voice came out hoarse.
Because I know the feeling of building walls. Maren looked at her own coffee cup, seeing her distorted reflection on the dark surface. My husband died 2 years ago. Cancer. Fast, cruel, relentless. And he was good, you know? He was terribly good. The kind of person who made bad jokes to nurses in the hospital because he didn't want them to be sad. Died apologizing for the debts he'd leave behind, as if he needed to apologize for getting sick. She felt her throat tighten, but forced the words out. And I built control. I built routines. I built an entire life based on never, ever being caught off guard again. Because if I control every variable, every number, every moment, maybe nothing bad can reach me. Or reach my daughter. She looked at Reid, and there was a mutual understanding there that needed no explanation. But the truth? Control is just another kind of prison. Reid stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, as if every spreadsheet she'd organized over the past 3 weeks was actually a self-portrait in numbers. "You're afraid," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Every day," Maren admitted. "I'm afraid I won't be able to pay the bills. I'm afraid of failing my daughter. I'm afraid that one day she'll ask me about her father and I won't be able to explain why good people suffer terrible things for no reason." But more than anything, she hesitated, because this was territory she didn't explore even with herself. "I'm afraid that if I stop moving, stop worrying, stop calculating every step, I'll finally fall apart. And I don't know if I can pick myself up again." The confession hung between them like incense smoke, sacred and dangerous. Reid extended his hand, slowly, as if Maren were a frightened animal that might flee at any moment, and touched her fingers on the desk. The touch was light, almost questioning. What if you didn't have to pick yourself up alone? Maren looked at that hand on hers, the hand of a man who signed million-dollar contracts, who raised empires, who never learned to hold another person, and she felt something inside her wavered dangerously, like a building too tall facing winds it shouldn't. This was madness.
He was her client, her temporary employer, someone who lived in a completely different world from hers. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the same thing she saw in the mirror every morning: loneliness disguised as strength. And maybe, just maybe, two broken people could lean on each other without completely collapsing. Or maybe they'd just break even more. But that Friday night, in the silence of an empty office where confessions flowed like the coffee growing cold and forgotten on the desk, Maren realized something that terrified her. She was starting to care about Reid Townsend in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with spreadsheets.
Maren woke to knocking on the door at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, and her first thought was that something terrible had happened. Nobody showed up at 6 in the morning with good news. She stumbled out of bed, wrapped in her worn robe, hair disheveled, without any of the layers of composure she usually wore like armor. Leah was still sleeping soundly in the bedroom, hugging the stuffed unicorn Reid had given her the week before, a gesture he tried to disguise as something that was forgotten at the office. Maren looked through the peephole and her heart stopped. Reid Townsend was on the other side of the door, in a suit, at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She opened the door in a mixture of confusion and pure panic. "Reid? What? Did something happen? Is everything okay?" He looked at her, really looked, in that way that made it seem like he was memorizing every detail. The old robe, the bare feet, the face without makeup, the messy hair, and something in his eyes softened in a way Maren had never seen before. "You're beautiful like this." The words came out simple, direct, as if they were an obvious fact that needed to be recorded. Maren blinked, still processing the coffee, the absurd hour, the man in a suit in the hallway of her building with no elevator. "You knocked on my door at 6 in the morning to compliment me?" Reid had the decency to look slightly flustered. "No, I mean, yes, but that wasn't the plan. I brought coffee and croissants and a proposal." Now Maren was fully awake, with that kind of alertness that comes when you realize your life is about to take an unexpected turn. What kind of proposal? Reid took a deep breath, as if he'd rehearsed this, but now the words refused to cooperate. "I was up all night. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday, about control being a prison. And I realized I've spent my entire life building, planning, controlling, trying to prove something I don't even know what it is anymore." He paused, and Maren could see the naked vulnerability on his face, that expression of someone about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there's water below. But then you showed up. You and the complete chaos of that first day, with your daughter and your strength disguised as desperation. And I saw for the first time in years something I couldn't control or buy or build. He held her gaze with an intensity that made the air between them vibrate. "I felt." The last word came out almost like a confession. Maren felt her defenses beginning to crumble, those carefully built walls cracking like ice under the sun. "Reid," but he continued, the words now flowing in a stream that seemed to have been dammed up for too long. "I know this is crazy. I know I'm your employer, that you have a complicated life, that you're probably thinking of a million reasons why this would be a terrible idea. And maybe it is. Maybe I'm terrible at this, at people, at connections, at everything that doesn't involve contracts and numbers. But you taught me something these past few weeks." He took a step forward, and Maren could feel the heat from the coffee mugs, or maybe it was the heat from him. "You taught me it's worth taking the risk, that some accounts don't balance on the spreadsheet, but they balance in the heart. So I'm here at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, probably looking like a madman, asking for something I've never asked anyone." The building hallway had never seemed so small, so intimate, despite the peeling paint on the walls and the worn carpet under her bare feet. Maren knew she should say something, anything, but the words were stuck somewhere between the fear and the desire beginning to pulse through her veins. "What are you asking?" Her voice came out weaker than intended. Reid carefully placed the coffee mugs on the floor, freeing his hands, and took hers with a gentleness that contrasted completely with his corporate image. "I'm asking permission to be part of your chaos. The early mornings with overdue bills, the days when school closes without warning,
The Friday pizzas and the unicorn drawings. I'm asking to be more than the man who hired you. He squeezed her fingers gently. I'm asking to date you, Maren. For real. Not hidden, not as some corporate secret. I want to take you and Leah to dinner. I want to show up with coffee at 6 in the morning because I spent the night thinking about you. I want to know your fears and your hopes and all those things you hide underneath perfectly organized spreadsheets.
The truth fell on Maren like a summer storm. Sudden, inevitable, impossible to ignore. She too had spent nights awake thinking about him. She too had caught herself looking for excuses to work later, to have a few more minutes of those conversations that seemed to peel away layers of protection they both wore. She too felt her heart race ridiculously when he showed up with those damn cups of coffee, pretending it was coincidence. But the fear? The fear was real. Fear of getting hurt again. Fear of hurting Leah, who had already lost a father and didn't deserve to see her mother fall in love with someone who might disappear. Fear that his world and hers were too incompatible, like oil and water, destined to separate eventually. What if it doesn't work out? The words came out almost as a whisper. What if I'm not enough for your world? What if... Reid released one of her hands and touched her face with a tenderness that made Maren's eyes burn. What if it does work out? What if you're exactly what my world needed? What if I spent 43 years building an empty empire just to get to the moment when you'd show up with a 6-year-old in a unicorn backpack and show me what really matters? He leaned closer, not close enough to kiss her, still giving her the choice, the control she valued so much. I know you're afraid. So am I. Terrified, to be honest. But I learned from a very wise accountant that control is just another kind of prison. And I'm tired of being trapped, Maren. I'm tired of sleeping in empty apartments and working myself to exhaustion because I have nothing better to do. I want mess. I want drawings on the refrigerator and cookie crumbs on the couch and someone who'll tell me when I'm being an idiot. There were tears in Maren's eyes now, those traitorous tears she hated because they revealed too much. She thought about Leah, sleeping in the bedroom with her unicorn. She thought about the 2 years of loneliness disguised as strength. She thought about all the nights she wished someone would share the weight, not because she couldn't carry it alone, she'd proven 1,000 times she could, but simply because sometimes a person just wants to rest their head on a shoulder and know they're not completely alone in this cruel and unpredictable world. Leah likes you, she finally said, and saw his face light up because he understood this wasn't a random response. It was the most important response. She drew you last week. You, me, and her with a dog. There's always a dog in her drawings. Reid smiled, and it was a genuine smile, stripped of that corporate seriousness. I always wanted to have a dog.
Maren let out a laugh that was half cry. You're crazy, completely crazy. But her hand squeezed his tighter, and that was an answer in itself. Showing up at 6 in the morning with coffee and declarations, that's not normal. Reid shrugged, and there was joy in his eyes now. You showed up at my office with a child and glitter unicorns on the first day. I think we've established that normal isn't exactly our strong suit. He pulled her closer, slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted. But Maren didn't pull back. She leaned forward, closing that small space between fear and courage, and when their lips touched, it was soft and terrifying, and perfect in a way she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. The kiss tasted of coffee and promises and new beginnings, all those scary things she'd been avoiding. But now, there in the worn hallway of her modest building, with the sun beginning to stream through the dirty window at the end of the corridor, Maren Briggs made the bravest decision she'd made since deciding to move forward after her husband's death. She decided to risk again. When they separated, both were smiling like idiotic teenagers. The neighbors will see you here, Maren murmured. They'll start gossiping. Reid picked up the coffee mugs from the floor and offered them to her. Let them talk. I don't care who knows. Actually, I want everyone to know. He paused, and there was a gentle seriousness in his voice now. I want the whole world to know that Reid Townsend, the reclusive billionaire who built half of Chicago, finally found something worth more than any contract. Maren accepted the mug, the coffee still warm against her palms. This is going to complicate everything. Reid tilted his head. Probably. People will judge. Definitely. It could go terribly wrong.
It could. He smiled that smile that was already beginning to become her favorite. But it could also work out, and you taught me it's worth taking the risk. He stole one more quick kiss, already pulling away. I have to go, meeting at 8. But tomorrow, dinner, you, me, and Leah, I know a place with excellent pizza and desserts that will make her eyes light up. And then he was going down the stairs, leaving Maren alone in the hallway with 2 mugs of coffee and a heart beating irregularly for the first time in years. She went into the apartment, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment. From the bedroom, she heard Leah stirring. In a few minutes, the girl would appear wanting pancakes and asking millions of questions, and Maren would have to find a way to explain that maybe, just maybe, their lives were about to change in ways she never imagined. But first, she took a sip of the coffee Reid brought and couldn't contain her smile. First, she was going to savor this moment. Because for the first time since her world had collapsed 2 years ago, Maren Briggs allowed herself something dangerous and wonderful: hope. 3 days later, hope turned to ashes.
The photo was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, gossip sites. Reid Townsend, real estate billionaire, kissing an unknown woman at the entrance of a modest building. The caption varied depending on the outlet, but the venom was the same. Townsend finds new entertainment on poor side of town, or reclusive billionaire caught in an affair with employee, or worst of all, gold digger manages to hook lonely tycoon. Maren stared at her phone screen with trembling hands while messages from unknown numbers kept arriving, journalists wanting interviews, people she didn't even know offering unsolicited advice, some insults from those who thought she was everything the headlines said. And Reid hadn't answered the phone since the night before, when it all exploded. Caroline sat beside her on the couch, reading the news aloud with that mixture of anger and concern only best friends can express. Listen to this one. Sources close reveal the mysterious woman is actually an accountant hired just a month ago, raising questions about the nature of the relationship and possible conflict of interest. Conflict of interest? Seriously? She threw her own phone on the couch forcefully. As if you'd planned all this, as if... Maren interrupted, her voice coming out hollow. Maybe they're right. Caroline turned to her so fast she nearly twisted her neck. No, not you too. But Maren was already in that dark place where anxiety lived, where every insecurity multiplied until it suffocated everything else. Look at this, Carol. Look at the difference between his world and mine. This building, she gestured around at the tiny apartment with peeling paint, versus penthouse overlooking the lake. I didn't even know people took pictures of other people on the street. In his world, this is normal. Paparazzi, headlines, public speculation about every move. Leah was in the bedroom, thankfully distracted by cartoons, oblivious to the hurricane destroying her mother's life on the other side of that closed door. But for how long? When would the other kids at school start bringing up comments they heard from their parents? When would Leah ask why strange people were taking pictures of them on the street? Maren ran her face over, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. It was exhaustion of the soul. The kind that comes when you realize you made a terrible decision and now you're going to pay the price. I can't do this to her, Carol. I can't expose my daughter to this circus. She already lost her father. She can't become a tabloid headline because of... She swallowed hard, because of a lapse in judgment on my part. Caroline squeezed her hand tightly. It wasn't a mistake. You fell in love. People fall in love. That's not a crime. But it felt like a crime when her phone rang nonstop with unknown numbers, when she opened the door and saw photographers camped out on the street.
Her phone rang again, but this time it was a number she recognized. Wyatt Hensley, Reid's press secretary. She answered with a trembling hand. Mrs. Briggs? His voice was professional, cold, calculated. We need to talk about how to manage this situation. Situation? As if she were a public relations problem to be solved. Where's Reid? Maren asked, hating how small her voice came out. Wyatt hesitated, and in that silence Maren heard everything he didn't say. Mr. Townsend is in critical meetings with investors who are concerned. This negative exposure comes at a delicate time for the company. We have a $1 billion development project in negotiations, and investors are questioning the stability of leadership. Each word was a knife. Wyatt continued, relentless. The best strategy would be a temporary separation. A few months of low profile until media attention dissipates. We can craft a joint statement explaining that the relationship was misinterpreted. Maren felt something inside her harden, that armor she wore when she needed to survive. You want me to pretend nothing happened? It wasn't a question. I want to protect all parties involved, including you and your daughter. This level of public scrutiny isn't good for anyone, especially for a child. Mr. Townsend is aware of this and he made a calculated pause, considering all options. Something broke inside Maren in that moment. Not from anger, but from terrible and painful clarity. Reid was considering options. Reid was in meetings discussing her as if she were part of a business strategy. And maybe Wyatt was right. Maybe that whole world of skyscrapers and billion-dollar contracts was too incompatible with her world of overdue bills and one-bedroom apartments. Maybe she'd been naive to think love would be enough when entire worlds separated them. Tell Mr. Townsend, Maren heard her own voice, surprisingly firm, that he doesn't need to worry about strategies. I'll make this easy for everyone. She hung up before Wyatt could respond, before her determination could waver. Caroline stared at her, eyes wide. Maren, what are you going to do? But Maren was already typing, fingers flying over her phone keyboard with that precision she used to organize spreadsheets, except now she was organizing the end of something that had barely begun. The message was short, professional, devoid of all the emotion tearing at her chest. Reid, I think it's best we end this before it causes more damage. Your company and reputation are too important. My daughter and privacy too. It was a wonderful mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. Take care, M. She pressed send before she could regret it, and then blocked his number. Simple, quick, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Except Band-Aids didn't hurt this much.
Caroline was standing now, gesturing frantically. Are you crazy? You're not even going to talk to him first? Not going to give him a chance to explain? Maren shook her head, eyes dry because she was beyond tears now. Explain what? That he was right from the beginning? That some accounts really don't balance no matter how much you want them to? She looked at her friend, and there was an old sadness in her face. The sadness of someone who already learned this lesson once and was foolish enough to forget. I'm good with numbers, Carol. Really good. And the numbers in this equation don't add up. He's a billionaire with investors and a public image to maintain. I'm a widow with debts and a daughter to protect. He lives in a world where paparazzi are part of the routine. I can barely pay rent on time. This difference, she gestured at the phone where the headline still glowed, cruel, doesn't disappear just because we want it to. But even as she spoke, part of her screamed that she was making a mistake. Part of her remembered the way Reid looked at her in the hallway, as if she were something precious. Remembered the 9 o'clock conversations about absent fathers and disguised loneliness. Remembered him showing up at 6 in the morning with coffee and naked vulnerability. But another part, the part that survived a husband's death, the mountain of debts, 2 years of fighting alone, that part knew protection was worth more than passion. That stability for Leah was worth more than kisses that made her heart race. That sometimes love wasn't enough when the entire world conspired against you. Her phone beeped. Message from an unknown number because of course Reid would have other cell phones, other paths. Maren, please, don't do this. Let me explain. Let me fix this. -R. She looked at the words on the screen and each letter was a temptation. It would be so easy to respond, unblock the number, accept whatever excuse he offered.
Caroline sat beside her again, voice soft now. Are you sure about this? Maren looked at the bedroom door where Leah was drawing, oblivious to everything. She thought about journalists at the school door. She thought about photographers following a 6-year-old. She thought about the price her daughter would pay for a romance Maren should have been smart enough to avoid from the beginning. No, she admitted, voice finally breaking. I'm not sure of anything, but I have to protect my daughter. And if that means giving up something that could be, that maybe was, the words died because it hurt too much to say them. Caroline pulled her into a hug while Maren finally let the tears fall. Silent tears of someone learning that sometimes doing the right thing hurts more than anything wrong. And somewhere on the other side of the city,
in an office on the top floor of a skyscraper, Reid Townsend looked at Maren's message on his phone screen and made a decision that would change everything. Because if she thought he'd give up that easily, she didn't know him as well as she thought. And if the world wanted a spectacle, he'd give them a spectacle no one would forget.
Wyatt Hensley was having an aneurysm, or at least seemed to be on the verge of one as he followed Reid through the company corridors, desperately trying to make him reconsider. You can't do this. You simply can't. We have investors threatening to pull $400 million. The board is panicking. The press is already in a frenzy, and you want to throw gasoline on the fire? But Reid kept walking, determined steps, jaw locked in that expression Wyatt had learned to fear, the expression that said no rational argument would make a difference. I scheduled a press conference in 2 hours, Reid said simply. In the main lobby. I want every camera you can gather. Wyatt stopped walking, jaw dropped. Have you lost your mind? Completely lost your mind? We should be doing damage control, not summoning all of Chicago's press. Reid turned to him, and there was something different in his eyes, something Wyatt had never seen in 15 years working for the man. It wasn't anger or corporate determination. It was clarity, pure and simple clarity. I've spent 43 years doing what was rational, Wyatt, building what made sense, avoiding risks that couldn't be calculated on spreadsheets. And you know what I got? An empty apartment and a life so perfectly organized there was no room for anything real. He took a step toward his advisor. I found something real, someone real, and I'm gonna fight for it, even if you, the board, the investors, and the entire city think I'm crazy. 2 hours later, the main lobby of Townsend Holdings was packed. Reporters, cameras, photographers, all there for blood, for the headline, for the scandal. No one expected what was about to happen. Reid stepped onto the hastily assembled small stage, without notes, without teleprompter, just him and a microphone and the naked truth he was about to reveal. Silence fell over the lobby like snow. Good afternoon. I called you here to clarify some things about the news that's been circulating over the past few days. His voice echoed firm, without hesitation. First, I want to confirm, yes, I'm in a relationship with Maren Briggs. It's not an affair, not a fling, not any of the pejorative terms the press has been using. It's a real relationship with someone extraordinary who came into my life and showed me what really matters. Flashes exploded. Reporters began shouting questions, but Reid raised his hand, asking for silence. Second, I read the headlines. I saw how they painted her as an opportunist, gold digger, woman who took advantage of a lonely man. His voice hardened, and I'll say now to all of you and anyone watching, you're wrong. Completely, shamefully wrong. He paused, and when he continued, there was passion in his voice that transcended any corporate speech he'd ever given. Maren Briggs is a freelance accountant who can barely pay her bills because she's drowning in medical debt her late husband left behind. She's raising a 6-year-old daughter alone, works until dawn, and still finds a way to smile when she gets home. The first day I met her, she showed up with her daughter because school closed unexpectedly and she had no one to leave the girl with. She was mortified, apologizing as if having an emergency were a crime. His voice softened. And I looked at her, at this woman who balanced spreadsheets and motherhood, dignity and desperation, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Real strength. Not the strength to build buildings or close deals. The strength to get up every day and fight, even when everything seems impossible. The lobby was completely silent now, everyone mesmerized. She didn't seek me out. I sought her out. She didn't want my money. In fact, when she found out how much I earned, she was uncomfortable. She didn't ask for anything beyond fair payment for the exceptional work she did. And when she realized our relationship was causing problems, you know what she did? Reid looked directly at the cameras. She broke up with me. Sent a message saying I was too important, that my company was too important, that she wasn't worth risking all of that. He let out a humorless laugh. And there's the cruel irony.
The woman the press paints as a gold digger is the same one who dismissed me to protect my reputation. The woman you call an opportunist is the one who refused any financial help I tried to offer. The woman you say is using a child as a tool is the most dedicated mother I've ever met, who's terrified of exposing her daughter to this media circus. His voice broke slightly, revealing genuine emotion. And I'm the idiot who almost let her slip away because I was afraid. Afraid of losing investors, afraid of tarnishing the company's reputation, afraid of risking the empire I spent decades building. He shook his head. But then I realized something. What kind of empire is this that demands I sacrifice the only real thing I found? What kind of success is this that leaves me alone in an empty apartment every night? Reid pulled papers from his jacket's inside pocket, unfolding them carefully. So I made some decisions. First, I'm implementing new policies for transparency and social responsibility at Townsend Holdings, something Maren inspired me to do. Second, I'm creating a philanthropic fund focused on helping families overwhelmed with medical debt. People like Maren, who did everything right but were crushed by a system that failed them.
Murmurs began, but Reid wasn't finished yet. Third decision, and the most important. To the investors who threaten to withdraw funds because of my relationship, I say this. You can go. You can take your $400 million and invest in someone who puts profit above integrity. Because I've discovered something no spreadsheet can measure. Who you are when no one is looking is worth infinitely more than how much money you can accumulate. The lobby exploded in chaos. Reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking frantically. Even Wyatt backstage was pale as a ghost. But Reid just smiled. That smile of someone who just jumped off a cliff and discovered they knew how to fly. One last thing, he said, and the lobby went silent again, magnetic. Maren, I know you're watching because Carolyn is probably forcing you to. I know you're afraid. I know you think you're protecting me by pushing me away, but I'm going to tell you the same thing you told me weeks ago when we talked about my father. You don't have to pick yourself up alone this time. His voice became soft, intimate, as if they were alone and not surrounded by dozens of cameras. You're worth more than any deal I could close, worth more than investor approval or favorable headlines. You, with your chaos and your strength, your fears and your courage, the early mornings organizing bills and the pens organized by color when you're anxious, you are the most valuable thing I've ever found. And if the world can't see that, then the problem is the world's, not ours. He held the camera's gaze as if he could reach through them to her. I'm not giving up on you, Maren Briggs. No matter how many headlines they write, how many investors I lose, how much money it costs. Because for the first time in my life, I found something that's priceless, and I'm going to fight for it. For us. For the chance to be part of your life and Leah's life, if you'll have me. The lobby fell into absolute silence. Then a reporter in the front row, a woman in her 50s with moist eyes, began to applaud. Slowly, others joined. It wasn't the response anyone expected from cynical press, but it was impossible not to be touched by vulnerability so raw, so honest.
Reid left the stage without taking questions, leaving the chaos behind. Wyatt caught up with him at the elevators, still processing what he'd just witnessed. You really just did that? Threw away potentially billions? Risked the entire company, all live? Reid pressed the elevator button, curiously at peace. Yes. Wyatt shook his head, but there was reluctant respect in his eyes. Will she take you back? Reid smiled. I don't know, but at least I'll know I tried, that I fought, that I didn't let fear win. The elevator arrived, and before entering, Reid turned to Wyatt. You know what's funny? I spent my whole life calculating risks, minimizing losses, and in the end, the biggest risk I ever took was opening my heart. But strangely, he looked through the glass windows at Chicago below, this city of contrasts where two impossible worlds had met. It doesn't feel like a risk. It feels like finally being alive. 3 days later, in Grant Park, under the gentle November wind, Reid waited. He'd sent the address to Maren through Caroline because she still hadn't unblocked his number. He didn't know if she'd come, didn't know if she'd watch the press conference, or simply decided he was too crazy, too complicated, too risky. But he would wait. He'd wait as long as it took. And then he saw her, walking down the park path, Leah skipping beside her, pointing at fallen leaves. His heart raced ridiculously for a 43-year-old man. When they got close enough, Leah saw him first. "Reid!" she shouted, running toward him. He knelt, opening his arms, and the girl threw herself at him with that absolute trust only children have. "You disappeared. Mommy was sad." Reid looked over Leah's head at Maren, who stood a few yards back, arms crossed in a defensive posture, but eyes red as if she'd been crying recently. "I know," he said softly. "I'm sorry."
Maren took a few more steps, stopping at a safe distance. "I saw the press conference." Her voice was neutral, careful. "Everyone saw the press conference. It's everywhere. Billionaire risks fortune for love. Fairy tale romance in Chicago. The same people who called me a gold digger are now calling me lucky." Reid stood, Leah still clinging to him. "And you? What are you calling yourself?" Maren bit her lip, fighting tears. "A coward, for almost letting fear destroy the most beautiful thing that's happened to me in 2 years." Her voice broke. "For almost letting you go without fighting because I was afraid of not being enough." He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, free hand going to her face. "You're more than enough. You're everything." And when he kissed her, with Leah laughing between them and leaves falling around and all of Chicago as wetness, Maren Briggs finally understood vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was the purest courage that existed. It was risking your heart even knowing it could break. It was choosing love even when the entire world said the numbers didn't add up. Because some accounts don't balance on spreadsheets. Some accounts balance in the heart. And when Reid whispered, "Marry me," against her lips, when Leah shouted, "And can we get a dog?" When Chicago blew cold wind, but they were warmed by each other, Maren realized that finally, she'd found the balance she'd spent 2 years looking for. Not in perfect control or foolproof plans, but in allowing herself to fall and trusting that someone would be there to hold her hand.
Just as Maren discovered that love can change everything, each of us also carries that power of transformation within. She learned that strength isn't only in maintaining absolute control over life, but in allowing someone to share the weight of the world with us. She learned that vulnerability, far from being weakness, is the purest courage. The courage to risk yourself even when everything seems impossible, even when the numbers don't add up on the perfect spreadsheets we create to protect ourselves. Reid, in turn, discovered that all the skyscrapers in the world are worth nothing if you don't have anyone to share the view with. That success without connection is just loneliness disguised as achievement. And together, they proved something the cynical world often forgets, that true love knows no class differences, doesn't bow before cruel headlines, and certainly doesn't give up when things get difficult. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to start over and believe in love, that we can be drowning in debt, exhausted from fighting alone, with our hearts protected by the highest walls, and still, the right person will show up with coffee at 6 in the morning and vulnerability in their eyes, ready to share not just the beautiful moments, but also the chaos, the overdue bills, the fears that haunt us at dawn. This story teaches us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply say yes when our heart is already screaming that it wants to, even if our head lists 1,000 reasons to be afraid. Because in the end, what really matters isn't the numbers we balance or the empires we build, it's who's by our side when the sun rises, who holds our hand when the world seems to crumble, who reminds us we're worthy of love exactly as we are. Maren and Reid's journey reflects something universal in all of us, the desire to be seen, understood, and loved despite, or perhaps because of our imperfections. We all carry pain, build defenses, reorganize pens by color when anxiety tightens.
We all have our empty apartments and our lonely early mornings fighting with bills that never balance. But the beauty lies right there, in finding someone who looks at our chaos and doesn't run, who sees our scars and chooses to stay, who understands that true love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing every day to build something real amid life's imperfections. And when we finally allow that to happen, when we lower our defenses and risk our broken heart one more time, we discover that maybe, just maybe, the most important account in life is the one that can't be calculated in numbers. The account of the love we share, the memories we create, the lives we touch simply by having the courage to be vulnerable.
If this story touched you in some way, if you recognized a piece of yourself in Maren organizing spreadsheets at dawn, or in Reid building empires to fill voids, leave in the comments. Love transforms lives. Because those words aren't just about the story you just followed. They're about your own journey, about your own courage to believe that better days will come, that love is still possible, that it's never too late to start over. Share your own story, your own hopes, because each comment is a reminder that none of us is alone in this search for genuine connection, for love that warms the soul and calms the fears we carry in silence. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience, with each episode, emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here, you'll find stories of people facing genuine dilemmas, proving that love doesn't only happen in fairy tales. It happens in apartments with peeling paint, in cold corporate offices, in hallways where hot coffee meets broken hearts willing to try again. Each episode is an invitation to believe that your own love story, whether past, present, or future, has immense value and deserves to be celebrated. Because in the end, we're all just looking for someone who makes the account finally balance, not on spreadsheets, but in the heart. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here, because as long as there are people brave enough to love despite fear, as long as there are hearts willing to risk themselves even after being broken, there will always be more stories to tell. Stories of new beginnings, of second chances, of love that finds a way even when all the numbers say it's impossible. And who knows? Maybe the next story we touch on here will somehow be similar to yours or to the one you'll still live when you finally decide that control is just another kind of prison, and that it's worth taking the risk of being happy.